Hello there. Thanks for joining me on this video podcast about streamer fishing. And I just happened to put together a very lengthy document here that talks about techniques and pretty much everything you need to know about finding success with streamers. And part of the cool perk of being a member of this community, the Fish On member, is that I'll send you a copy of this so you can study and find more success the next time you're out there fishing rivers or lakes using streamers. So I encourage you to be part of the group. Happy to have you. So there are a lot of nuances when it comes to finding success with streamers. And you're gonna notice I'm gonna be looking down at my notes quite a bit here because I spent several hours putting this together and just kind of organizing my thoughts in a very careful and easy to understand way so that you potentially can find success when you're out there next time fishing streamers. So what we're gonna cover is first the introduction, right? We'll start talking kind of the overview of fly fishing with streamers, having a positive and energetic approach. That is important, right? Having the right mental mindset when you get out there, having confidence that you're gonna have success when fishing streamers, to understanding streamer fishing techniques in rivers and also in lakes, stripping techniques, kind of decoding the dynamics of how to fish streamers to find success and get that fish to bite. Choosing the right fly line, that is almost equally as important as techniques, right? If you don't have the fly line, you're not gonna be able to get that streamer to wherever you're casting it. So it's super important to have the right fly line, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Fly rod and size for streamers, fly fishing presentations, having a diverse toolkit is important. And finally, why I feel you should definitely be in the streamer game. So let's first discuss rivers. There is what's called the drift technique. Now the drift technique usually is used in a drift boat or a raft. It's a little tougher to do if you're standing on the bank, but it can be done. Essentially, when you cast that streamer out, you're doing somewhat of a downstream mend. Now I know that's counterintuitive, but you want to try to give a drag-free drift to that streamer as it's beginning to make its swing downstream. Now, the drift maneuver, again, can be done under an indicator, which will allow you to control the depth and not get snagged on the bottom all the time. But that is one really effective, and it's more of a winter presentation. Slower presentations in winter a lot of times are better than faster presentations that you'll find in the spring, summer, and fall months. So using the drift technique can be effective, but you do have to be careful not to get stuck on the bottom. One of the most common ways of fly fishing streamers is the swing. And essentially, there's a couple of kind of swings as well. There's more of just kind of a common swing to where you're not doing much at all with the fly as far as action. You're just allowing the river to work with the marabou as it follows through and goes behind some rocks and different currents as it's swinging. Gives a lot of action to the fly. If you need a little bit more of a dynamic presentation, a lot of times you can pull or make little jigging motions on that streamer as it's swinging to hopefully entice a fish to bite. So again, we talked a little bit about stripping techniques. You do want to vary up your stripping technique, right? Experiment when you're out there. Try a slower pull back, retrieve, little sketchy movements, right? Because you want to entice that fish to go after this wounded bait fish, because that's kind of what you're going for, right? You're kind of a wounded bait fish, you're vulnerable, you're skittish. So you want to kind of be the bait fish in the river and make it act differently. Try slow presentations and strip back. Try quick, almost like jigging actions. Try a panic type of strip back. A lot of times, if you vary up your strip and not just do one single thing all the time, is when you'll find success. And then once you find that, stick with it throughout the day, because that's what the trout are keyed on in that given moment. If you're fishing from a boat, I fished with a guide recently in Colorado, and he called banging banks. And I actually love that sound, right? If you're not bringing it right to the bank from a boat, then you're too far out, right? You want to have that bait fish or streamer start in the shallowest edge of the river and have it kind of panic swim away, because those fish are sitting just outside, the trout are sitting just outside the bank waiting for bait fish that are in the slower edges, right on the edge of the river, waiting for them to panic swim out so they can go and attack. So banging banks is very important when fishing from a boat or raft. Get that fly as close to the bank as possible. You are going to lose some flies and brush, branches, and sometimes even hitting the rocks. That's just gonna happen. That's part of the game, but you do wanna get as close to the bank as possible when you're fishing from a boat. You also wanna target structure, rocks, under and above the water, behind and in the pillow in the front, logs that are underwater, branches, trees, shooting it under trees, as long as that tree isn't well into the water and they're gonna snag you up. But you wanna look for structure where you think a trout might be hiding. A lot of times you'll find success if you're targeting structure like that in rivers. Seams and back eddies. Fish want the path of least resistance, right? They're gonna be right in the bubble line, right in that seam between the fast and slower currents, and they're gonna wait for stuff to swim by. So target seams, both deep into the seam and right on the edge of the seam when you're floating down the river, or if you're fishing from a riverbank. A lot of times you'll find success in those back eddies and the seam kind of leading into those back eddies. So the key thing when fishing streamers from a boat or from the bank in rivers is being adaptable, right? You want to do a lot of different things when fishing streamers. One of my most successful techniques is the upstream cast. I always start with that. For whatever reason, when one of those bait fish are skittering downstream, it just triggers a trout to attack. So always start up with an upstream cast, and then try a drift technique, and then try a swing, and then try a swing with some dynamic stripping patterns mixed in there. And if there's fish there, you will eventually find some success if you just change it up a lot while you're on the rivers fishing streamers. So now let's talk about fishing streamers in still water. Streamer fishing in lakes introduce a unique set of challenges and opportunities, requiring anglers to adapt their techniques for still water environments. I'm gonna go over several effective streamer fishing techniques to consider when tackling lakes. The dart and pause retrieve. This is one of the most effective and deadly presentations when fishing streamers in lakes. You want to strip it back, stop, let it sink, strip it again, stop, let it sink. A lot of times the fish will eat it when it stops and starts to sink because it thinks it's a wounded bait fish, and they're thinking, oh, here's my opportunity to eat it. And when you go to strip it again, all of a sudden, holy smokes, you got a fish on the other end of that thing. Or they'll wait till right where it starts to dart away and attack it then, and then that tug, right? It's cliche, but the tug definitely is the drug when fishing streamers. It is so much fun. So if you're doing that streamers in lakes, do that pause, kind of the stop, dart and pause, retrieve, and you'll find that you'll have a lot of success with streamers in lakes. The slow hand twist retrieves. I call it the finger roll. Some people call it the figure eight. A lot of times slower is better with streamers. You want to imitate a bait fish that's just like going, oh my God, I'm nearly at the end of my life. I'm just gonna kind of swim here, kind of see if I can make it, and boom, that thing is being eaten by a big trout. So that is another effective technique when fishing streamers in lakes. Vertical jigging. So if you've got that fly, a big heavy streamer, and it goes down, and let that sink all the way to the end of your leader, and then just do kind of almost like I use a pullback, a quick pullback. Some people use the tip of their fly rod. I don't like the slack that happens though. Once you jig up and bring the fly rod down, there's slack that happens between there. So I use kind of just a quick pull. That can be super effective. Trolling streamers. Now this can be kind of boring, but if you're tired of casting, just throw the streamer out there. And if you're in a float tube or a boat, just troll it around the lake. A lot of times that can be successful to catch fish too, and very low maintenance on the casting arm. Deep water dredging. Now this is one of my favorite things to do. You need to understand the depth of the lake and where it's deepest to find success doing this. Otherwise, you're just gonna catch a bunch of weeds at the bottom. But I'll get on either a long sink tip or a full sink line and a heavy fly and just dredge for fish. Sometimes fish are sitting at the very bottom of these deep lakes, and you gotta be able to get down there, and that is a very effective way to go after fish by dredging for them using sinking lines and heavy flies. Now, this is something that I've been doing for a while and found some success, and this kind of coincides with the drifting in lakes. I'll put a streamer under an indicator and I'll slowly finger roll it back. That controls the depth, so now the streamer's not gonna go all the way to the bottom. I know exactly where the streamer is in the water column, because that's another thing you gotta figure out, right? Part of all these techniques is trying to find out where the fish are eating in the water column, and that also pertains to rivers. So putting an indicator on a long leader and either having that fly 10 feet, 8 feet, 6 feet below that indicator and slowly finger rolling it back, or even slowly trolling along if you're in a float tube, can be very effective when fishing streamers in lakes. So let's talk about some of the types of streamers that you can fish with. And on this list, I also list some of my confidence flies and streamers that I always find success in. Woolly buggers, right? Woolly buggers are the classic streamer, and they've been around for a long time, and they are super effective, both in big ones or if you're going with a micro size. Woolly buggers can be very effective and really is an all-around great all-purpose streamer pattern. Clouser minnows. Now, clouser minnows, I have used clouser minnows in freshwater applications, but typically these streamers are used in saltwater, especially around my neck of the woods, Puget Sound, sea run cutthroat fishing. Clouser minnows can be very effective streamer for fishing any type of sea run type of trout. Sculpin patterns. Now, a lot of you know I have a favorite sculpin pattern, which I list in here, but sculpins can be super effective, and I do prefer natural colored sculpin patterns over some of the brighter colors that you see out there. Now, I do have a list of my confidence flies. There are specific flies that I've found that work almost in every application, whether it's rivers or lakes. And if you want to know where those are or what these are, be a member and I'll send you a copy of this PDF. It's about 10 pages full of information that'll help you find success with streamers. So let's talk about fly line. Now, there are a lot of nuances when it comes to streamer fishing and fly line. And this is either in floating or sinking line. There are two schools of thought. And you have to also consider how big are the streamers that you're fishing? How big are the fish that you're going after? If you're going after bigger fish using bigger streamers, you're gonna want a heavier weighted forward floating line to be able to throw that fly out, and you're gonna need a strong enough taper to be able to present the fly. If you don't have a heavy shooting head on a streamer line, you're not gonna have a lot of success turning over that streamer. If you notice that you're casting right now and that streamer is falling well short, and sometimes maybe your fly line is going further than your streamer, kind of falls in and gets tangled up in your fly line, that's because you don't have the right fly line. You do want to have a fly line with a heavier taper to be able to roll that fly over and to shoot that line out, those heavier flies. Now, if you're using smaller woolly buggers, typically just a standard trout line. I have fished and had success, but if I'm going into heavier flies, it is better to have a line specifically designed for heavier streamers. Tapered leaders also need to be considered. I wouldn't use anything less than a 3X. 3X or heavier whenever you're casting streamers. If you've broken a streamer off in the back cast, it's probably because you're using 4X tippet and you're just snapping it off. The fly is too heavy, and that dynamics of the cast, once it reaches the back cast and you bring it forward, it's almost creates like a whipping action because that fly is so heavy, a lot of times it'll snap right off. Now, if you're using micro streamers, really small streamers, a lot of times you can get away with 4X, but I would use 3X, 2X, 0X. Streamer fishing, the fish don't care about the leader. It's likely not going to be leader shy unless you're in a real specialized fisher. In my experience, I found that heavier leader does the trick when fishing streamers. You also want to consider using floating line, longer sink tips if you need to get down a little bit further, or full sinking lines. There are a lot of dynamics based off of where you're fishing, the depth of what you're fishing, how big the river is, how deep the lake is, to be able to decide what type of line that you should get, right? And this document also covers that in a little more in depth. So now the question is, what size of rod do I need to use, and what action should that rod be? Now, typically I've used either a 5, 6, 7, or 8 weight, and that's going after some really big Lahontan trout if I'm using an 8 weight rod for streamer fishing. Heavier rods are better for streamer fishing. Now, depending on the size of weight you're using a rod really depends on how big the predatory fish are that you're going after, right? If I'm fishing for muskie, I'm using an 8 weight. If I'm fishing for trout, a lot of times using a 5 or 6 weight because I am throwing the heavier fly. So it really does depend on what you're fishing for, on the size of fly rod. Now, action, right? Action of the fly rod. There are two schools of thought. In my opinion, is based off of my 40 years of fly fishing. I prefer a medium or moderate fast action fly rod because you still get a quick recovery, right? When you have all that line going back, that heavy shooting head and the fly, you're gonna get a lot of bend, and the rod's gonna have to be able to bend back, right, to deliver the energy into the fly line to get that streamer out to where you're trying to cast. My opinion is if you have a moderate fast action fly rod, you're still getting that quick recovery of the fly rod blank, and it still allows the fly to be delivered wherever you're trying to cast it with a lot less effort. Medium or moderate fast action rods are far easier to cast. Some will argue that you need the speed of a fast action rod to do what I just described. However, what I have seen, fast action rods, if you don't have the timing perfect, if you haven't been casting for a lot of years, you're gonna have more trouble with a fast action rod over a moderately fast action rod. I typically use moderate fast action rods, and that's why I designed one, a moderate fast action rod, to do just this, make streamer fishing easier, because it does deliver the fly line out easier, and it doesn't have a problem with pulling all that heavy line and heavy flies. That recovery time is quick, and the fly gets out there with a lot less frustration for the angler. And that's just my opinion over several decades of fly fishing streamers. So again, in this document, I also cover a lot of the presentations, right? There's a diverse, dynamic set of presentations to use when using streamers, from using the upstream cast that we talked about, to dead swings, to active swings, slower stripping, faster stripping, using streamers under an indicator both in rivers and lakes, and just understanding that there has to be a dynamic approach when you're out there using streamers. It's not a one size fits all. You have to vary things up if you're gonna find success with streamers. And that's the funnest part, right, when fishing streamers, is it isn't that super technical thing, right? You don't really necessarily have to worry about the perfect presentation when it comes to streamers, because you're chucking out a big piece of meat out there for that fish that want to chase down. So even if you splash it down hard or you're stripping it back super fast, there's just something ridiculously fun about fishing streamers. And if you haven't been doing that yet, you need to. Dry flies are awesome, right? Visually, I love fishing nymph as well, but streamers really is just, you have to experience it to really fully appreciate how fun it is. Now, there is a technique, right? When you are streamer fishing, you want to avoid the trout set. You want to do a strip set, and as soon as you feel that fish is firmly hooked on, that's when you then bring your rod tip up. So keeping a tight line with a strip set, and then raise your rod up from there. That is key when fishing streamers. Now, even by doing that, you're still gonna miss half of the takes, right? A lot of times they're trying to ambush, trout are trying to ambush these streamers, so they'll come in and just blast it, and they're gonna miss. No fault to yourself, no fault to you. It's just because the fish are just didn't get hooked. A lot of times I like streamers that have the articulated hooks, the hooks that are in the back, because it just gives you a little bit better chance of hookup when they're blasting it like that. But sometimes they'll hit it from the side, sometimes they'll hit it from above, and they just don't get hooked. So that's normal. You're not doing anything wrong. Just use a strip set when you are setting the hook initially until you feel that fish is firmly on. So a lot of nuances, right, when it comes to fishing streamers, and that's why I put this document together. And if you're interested in receiving this document, be a part of a very dynamic, passionate group of anglers. The group is growing just beyond my wildest dreams. So I'm super excited about our engaged community that we're growing here, Fish On members. Thank you to those that have joined. I appreciate you. You're getting me closer and closer to my goal of doing this for a living one day. So I appreciate your support. And if you're considering being a member, You won't be disappointed. And remember, you can cancel at any time. If you come to the group and say, this isn't for me, you can cancel. It's a month-to-month type of thing. But I'd be happy to have you join the group. And here's a video right here that talks a little bit more about this group, and I hope that you decide to join. All right, everybody, until the next time. Oh, and if you remember, shoot me an email and I'll send this to you. All right, until the next time, fish on.